Welcome to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine. Looking for inspiration for your life and your wine glass? This is your podcast. Here's Kirsten.
Hello and welcome back to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. And I'm so excited to have Danielle Bryan with Shamanic Twist back in the studio with me, talking about a series we're doing on time. We've had a few that you may have listened to, but I think we're going to have a total of about 6 of these. And pretty much I'm the newbie, left-brained reality person, and we've brought Danielle in to bring a little more of the energetics into the conversation because it's so important, as I've realized as I've gone along. So welcome, Danielle.
Thanks, Kirsten. Great to be here.
Super happy to have you. And today we have decided to have a conversation about time and the perception of the slowing of time during an emergency or a crisis.
Or even during one of those timeless moments of euphoria. I have one of those stories too, where everything slowed down. Not just in a crisis.
No, you're supposed to be bringing in only crises today.
Oh, okay. Well, we can stick to crisis then.
I have no data on happy time slowing down.
All right, we'll throw it in at the end.
Okay, that's perfect. All right, never mind. We're not going to edit that out because we love Danielle, and she's going to add it to the end, which is a much better place to be than all these crises that we're going to talk about.
See, there we go.
All right. So I did find a word that I've never heard before, talking about time, and it's called tachypsychia. Tachypsychia. Is that how you pronounce that? Tachypsychia.
That's how I would say it.
Is a neurological condition that distorts the perception of time. And it's usually induced by physical exertion, drug use, or in what we're going to talk about today, a traumatic event. So tachypsychia. There you go, you guys. You have a new word already right at the first minute of the show. So as I was looking at some of this information online about different studies that have happened in that, it seemed I wanted to kind of do an overview of what are we really talking about here. So I'll start with an example of someone had written a book, Steve Taylor. He's a professor of psychology at Leeds Beckett University, and he's written some books, one of them called Making Time. And after writing this book, he was sent many examples of people's experience of this slowing down of time. And this story, I keep thinking about this story because it so perfectly defines it for me. And I've certainly had these experiences. I'm sure you have as well. But this story says, this is about a man who helped an old lady who had lost her balance and was about to fall over. Okay? So he says, quote, "Instinctively, I reached out and wrapped my left arm around her, but was off balance, and the weight of her pulled me down too. But then, between that moment and hitting the pavement a split second later, everything went into slow motion, and in what seemed like a beautifully choreographed series of movements, I twisted myself underneath her so that she fell on top of me, and I relaxed my body sufficiently to ensure that I didn't break any of my bones upon impact." So there is a perfect, very well written, very small amount of time description of what he went through. Do you have a story to share about this?
Yeah, I do. And I believe it was in our last episode that we talked about stepping outside of linear time that flies like an arrow, right? The past, the present, and the future, and it goes in a straight line. And we talked about stepping outside of linear time, which we can look at as circular time or timelessness, right? And in my work as a shamanic practitioner and teacher, we work a lot with the concept of stepping outside of linear time into the place of timelessness. And in our last podcast, we talked about being in that flow like athletes who seemingly do these amazing things. And how do they do it? We talked about being completely present right? Pulling our circuits of energy out of the past, out of the future, and being fully present. So in that example, it makes me think about his experience of that moment was that everything slowed down. But the fact that his body twisted in the right way and he loosened and he did all these perfect things in a short amount of time circles back to that conversation you and I had, which is in that moment, there was nothing else for him. In that moment, what was happening is exactly what was happening. He wasn't thinking about where he was going or where he had been, right? So in timelessness or non-linear time, in such a short amount of time, the way we would calculate it on our watch, all these amazing things happened perfectly for him to loosen his body and for her to fall on him. And so it's so fascinating to me as we continue to do these episodes that it's like, it's that thing.
Right.
Oh, timelessness. It's that. Yes, today we're talking about the slowing of time, and that story exemplifies that perfectly, but it also exemplifies that complete presence where all these amazing things happen instantly.
So have you had a car accident or something,
I've
or
had
a fall? Or
My most recent was a year ago. I'm pretty sure it was a year ago. It doesn't matter. I was hiking up on Mount Timpanogos, and that's here in our beautiful state of Utah. And I was on a hike with a girlfriend, and we were hiking this path. And on one side was the hillside, the mountain that went up, and it was a wide path, wide enough for people to cross each other, oncoming traffic, if you will, to cross each other and feel comfortable. It wasn't this really sketchy single track on this mountain cliff, right?
Okay.
That's not what I was hiking. And on the other side was a pretty steep drop off that then got even steeper into a whole bunch of rocks, and it was a cliff, and falling off that side definitely looked like a helicopter ride out. And I stepped on a rock that was wobbly. Now, I was in the middle of this fairly wide path, stepped on this rock. In that moment, everything stopped because I knew I was losing my balance and falling. And I reached out, and I was falling to the non-desirable side. Not into the mountain where I just would have been bounced back, right? And I fell backwards, and I remember grabbing a plant that really wasn't going to do anything for me, and I went head first backwards over, and everything stopped. And I remember my friend yelling my name, and it sounded like she was really far away, even though she was right behind me. And I remember loosening, like the man in this story, just loosening my whole body, thinking, you can't resist this. So just relax. And because I fell head first backwards, I saw what could have been, which was the rocky bottom cliff. And in that moment where it felt like everything stopped, I had two thoughts. One was, wow, I can't believe this is happening. And the second thought immediately was, I don't have time for this in my life. Because I had a class that I was teaching in like 3 days. And I was like, I don't have time for this. I can't fall off this cliff right now.
Oh my gosh.
And it struck me as odd that those were the two thoughts. And they were so prevalent that I remember it.
Yes.
A year later, exactly how it was. So I tumbled, and then I just stopped. And to me, it felt like I was stopped. There was nothing that said I should have stopped, but I felt like I was stopped. So, now this story is moving out of just the slowing of time into a bigger question of like, so what was that?
Yes.
Right. And in my world, in my belief, in my practice, I absolutely believe that I had angels, if you will, show up and stop me. It was as if my butt hit a hand, an open hand, and that's what stopped me. Wow. So anyway, I topple over. And all of this happened in a split second. I mean, how long does it take for you to fall, really? Yeah, right. But it felt like it took a really long time. And then I was stopped, and then I was looking back up, and it was steep enough that I couldn't just like pop up and come onto the trail. Like I was on my belly, and I had to kind of like shimmy back up to the trail. And my friend was laying there looking down at me. And it felt like it was a long, drawn-out process that, you know, Kirsten, I can't even tell you 30 seconds, maybe, but slowed down enough that her voice was far away. And I saw the rocks below me, and I felt the tumbling, and I had the whole thought process, right? And when I came back up and out of that, and I remember standing on the trail and thinking, wow, I can't believe that just happened. What was that? And it was so striking that her and I actually had a version of this very conversation of like, wow, it felt like everything slowed down. And it's as if you can see everything happening. Like I remember the shrubbery that I grabbed onto, and I remember seeing the clouds as I went down, and then the topple, and then the trees again, right, as everything was righting itself as I became head up, and so it was really quite a fascinating experience. And I remember coming to it that way because nothing dire happened. I had the good fortune of being able to continue our hike and be reflective about the just, what is it? Being in awe, kind of.
In awe.
Wow, that was such a wild event. And to remember everything about it.
Well, that you're describing what science is studying. And really, truly, I haven't found enough data on any one reason or one scientific explanation as to why this would happen. I mean, this gentleman, there's, first thing, most people agree this is some kind of evolutionary adaptation for us to protect to protect us in a long, this is science, not the shamanic world. I'll be curious to what you say. But it's an evolutionary adaptation that allows us time, or the perception of time, to survive emergency situations. And then in what you're describing is one of the ways they're studying this is to talk about what is it? Is it the number of impressions that we get during an emergency situation that causes us to feel that the time is spread out? And you describing the clouds and the shrubbery and the rocks and that. I mean, this gentleman, Dr. David Eagleman, he's at Baylor College of Medicine. And one of his specialties is basically studying how our brains perceive and understand time. And he specifically, because of a childhood experience, he likes to study our sense of time and how it distorts in crisis situations, right? Because he had this situation as a kid. And he said, regardless, as he's done all of these studies and had all of these people give him all of this information, he said, whether it's a bike accident or a car crash or falling off a cliff or whatever, he said, everyone says the same thing. It felt like the world was moving in slow motion. And his theory, and some of the science that he's tried, and the experiments that he's tried to present, are dedicated to basically his theory that mostly our memories are like sieves, and they let a lot through because it's not important information. We're just not writing down the information in our head. And he cites, to think about walking down a crowded street in a city, and you're passing people and you're seeing stop signs and you're seeing advertisements and you're not registering any of it, sadly for the advertisers, of course, right? But then he said, suddenly a car comes swerving, heading straight to you. And he said, suddenly your memory shifts and you are writing down everything, every cloud, every piece of dirt, every fleeting thought, anything that might be useful to help you escape from this immediate situation. And it sounds very similar to like what you were describing. So what his theory is, it's maybe your brain's way of making sense of all this information. And he said, you know, at the time you become hyper aware,
right? And
you're suddenly imprinting all of these details that you wouldn't have imprinted otherwise. So then when your memory looks back at this, you start saying that was a long period of time. So that's one of these, it's like an increasing number of impressions, interpretation of why time seems to slow down, and you're tied to your memory. And as I went through this, another one that he talked about was, another way that he talked about it was the fact that frightening events are associated with richer and denser memories. And he has done experiments that have shown that the more memory you have of an event, the longer you believe it took. So this is how he did this. Okay, so here's the experiment.
All right.
And I question this even me, Miss I love science and all this woo-woo stuff is still a little bit out there for me. But he was trying to figure out how to scare the hell out of people, okay? And, you know, he was like, he took them to Six Flags and put them on the scariest ride. And it didn't work, okay? And I'm like, and then his experiment, what he did is he had them lay down in a, like a netting, you'd call it like a fancy rock climbing apparatus, almost like a hammock kind of thing. And he had them lie down in this. They knew this was going to happen, by the way.
Right.
This is the problem for me. Because they knew they were going to fall 150 feet into a net below. Free fall. Nothing holding them up.
Right.
Now, that is a problem, certainly. But it's not shocking you. This isn't a shock. These are volunteers who've signed up for this experiment. They know there's a net at the bottom. And yeah, it might be scary, but it's not shocking. But what he found, he put a watch on them that, and he asked them to look at the watch as they fell, because the watch was feeding out numbers at a little bit too rapid a pace for us to actually, in normal life, see.
Okay.
And his theory was, if you're living in slow motion, technically, really, you'd be able to see those numbers. Now, they couldn't see the numbers, okay? So it seemed to support that they're not living in slow time. But they did overestimate the amount of time they were falling. They were only in the air 3 seconds, and they estimated between 5 and 6 seconds of time that they were falling. So in the air, it did feel that they were falling longer, even though they did have a protected exit in this case. So I just feel, okay, so what do you think about that experiment, number one? Because to me, the lack of the shock is enough to negate that experiment.
Possibly. However, it makes me think about when I was doing the ropes course over here in Park City. And you're harnessed in. You know you're not going to die if you fall off the tightrope thing that you're walking or what have you. You know you're safe. And I don't know, maybe it's psychological, maybe it's biological. There is still a feeling of shock and fear, even though mentally you logically understand you're not going to die.
Really? So that was, you went through that.
I did go through that.
Okay.
And I remember on the course analyzing this. I remember thinking as I'm making my way across one of these terrifying things, being like, but you know nothing's going to happen to you.
Right.
And you are still actually having this reaction, viscerally having this reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, this is fascinating, because all of my faculties are telling me, don't worry about it.
Right.
You're fine.
You'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
They
You'll
would
fall,
get,
you'll scramble up, and you'll start over. Maybe you'll make it across the second time. And I was still having a reactionary thing on the inside. And I remember just translating that over into life of like, wow, this is so fascinating, because this is where fear can either paralyze you or where you can recognize, you know what, I have nothing to fear, nothing bad is going to happen. And I'm talking about that in context of where we limit ourselves in terms of taking the risk in our business or putting ourselves out there or being vulnerable, right? Not obviously jumping off a cliff with no paraphernalia to save you. Not that kind of risk. Right?
Not like an 18-year-old boy risk.
Yes.
Just, out of that realm of reality.
Yeah.
Well, it was another of the things that I was looking at in terms of preparing for this talk was that they actually have found that there is a part of the brain that lights up when you are threatened, that is different than the perception of normal life. And the way they did this was they took people that were watching a very close screen, like I'm picturing the they're at the like space theaters where they're like you feel like you're in whatever's going on. And they had spheres that were very big and scary looking coming at the people or going away from the people or just bouncing around and not threatening them. And they had these people wired up. And as they were wired up, I'm guessing they weren't in a theater. They must have been in an MRI machine watching this. Obviously, I'm like putting them in some kind of like old Globe theater or something. But anyway, so as they were watching the spheres come toward them, there was a part of the brain called the cingulate cortex that lit up more than any other place. Now, there were other parts that were lighting up, but this was the brightest, and it was different than just watching the spheres bounce around. So it was feeling like it was going to hurt them.
Right.
And what they showed, this is the middle part of the brain, and this part of the brain has been shown in other MRIs to be especially activated when an event is happening that we feel is personal in nature. It's or in our world. Like this is coming into my life. This is about to affect me personally. And so there's, the study of that basically showed that now we can at least pinpoint what part of the brain is reacting when time is slowing down. And in fact, in that study as well, when the balls came at the people, they thought they were coming at a longer time than the any other non-threatening balls. It was time had slowed down for them as well. So anyway, do you have any brain stuff? Yeah, talk.
Well, I don't have brain stuff, but I have commentary.
Yes, do comment.
Yes, the concept and the idea, we keep talking about time slowing down. And that is what we are talking about. But as we're having this conversation, and you're talking about the region of the brain, and they're wired up, they're watching something. So one of the things that's pinging for me as we're talking about that particular example is perceived threat, perceived fear.
Oh,
right. And so in that study, the brain was still reacting with perceived fear, just like me on the ropes course, in the same way as if it would if it was really happening, not just a perceived threat.
Correct.
Right? So that just brings up a question, not that we need to have an answer to it, but just a thought, a ponder of that place of how strongly our perception will create our reality as well, right? Because the perceived thought is still doing the same thing. It's slowing time down. They think that it's coming at them longer than what it really is. It's firing that part of the brain. And it makes me think about the slowing of time. What exactly is that? So we're talking about, well, this part of the brain fires, and this study shows this, and it's the account of impressions, and all those things are true. I mean, people are looking at this and they're collecting data around it. And if we want to expand the wonderment, it makes me think about the fact that in those moments, why does it feel like everything is slowing down? I suspect that it's, again, goes back to that place where all of our resources and our faculties become 100% available in that moment. Mm-hmm. In those moments, whether perceived clearly or real, whatever that means, real, that we are no longer in our capability of multitasking and thinking about 100 different things at one time, that all of that stops. And everything is about this one moment that is happening.
And it doesn't matter whether it's perceived. Yes. Wow, what an interesting thought. Thank you. Yeah. So we're gonna take a quick break here. And then we are going to come back with another theory that I'll be curious to hear about why it seems that time slows down when we're in a crisis or an emergency. So stay tuned, you guys.
Thank you for tuning in to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine.
Thank you to Uplift Gift, our sponsor today. Uplift Gift is a gift box company that you can use to send beautiful, comforting items to your friends around the country who may be going through challenging times. These days when it is harder to get out and grab a bunch of beautiful things from around different stores in your area and then box them up and get them to the post office, Uplift Gift is there for you to select lovely items, including caramels and beautiful organic teas and a pashmina that you can send to your friends around the country if they need some uplifting. So thank you again to Uplift Gift for sponsoring the show today.
Thanks for staying tuned to Wines and Wonders. Now back to Kirsten.
Well, welcome back. And we are talking today I'm talking today with Danielle Bryan of Shamanic Twist, and we're talking about about the situation when someone's in an emergency or a crisis, or we've just talked about the fact that they're in a perceived crisis or situation, emergency of threat, and how their perception of time will slow down. That almost universally, in fact, there was they report that 71% of people in a lot of this analysis who say they've been in an emergency situation, 71% of people are saying that they felt time slow down in their emergency. And so we've got another theory to chat about briefly before we go into what wine would I pair with this. So the second theory that they're talking about, that I found quite a bit about online, is how it's a theory that when you are put in an emergency situation, that your body processes speed up relative to what they normally are. Your heart rate's faster. Everything is going faster. Therefore, with you and your metabolism and everything going faster, it makes us feel that the outside world is slowing down. So that is another theory. And what they're saying, so this is a whole different ballgame here. Let me give you what they think happens. They say the arousal level of the body is heightened to its peak. They say basically the arousal means that the body and mind are in a physical and mental state of being highly active and awake. the mind is focused and we feel absolutely alert, right? This is happening. This situation then increases the chances for survival because we then have the opportunity to defend ourselves or run away from the danger. And what they say is because the body and mind are set now in a mode of extreme speed, the world around you seems to slow down. And therefore, since the world seems to slow down in your area, in where you are, we see and hear more detail of what's actually happening, because then that leads to the feeling that the event lasts longer than it actually does. So so what do you think about that theory? I mean, my gosh.
I think from, the lens that I bring to these conversations.
Yes, which I love. Yes. Bring it.
To repeat myself, I really think that it's about all our circuits of energy get pulled to the present moment, that we're not thinking about the past and we're not thinking about the future. And we're simply where we are. Now, in this case, they're actually studying that when this is happening, your body is having a reaction. And that's true. We all know that, right? Heartbeat goes up. Everything in that capacity happens in that nature. And so I love the relativity of, if everything here is moving this fast, then yes, it's going to feel like everything out there is slow because it's not matching my same internal frequency. Right?
Kind of the usual.
Yeah. But again, the reason that I think this is a Danielle thinks moment.
Speaking through all the gods who filter it through her head.
Is that all of these things are happening, and all of these studies that you're reading, it's not like, oh, well, that's one way to look at it, but that's not really what's happening. It's not that. It's like, yeah, everything's increasing. Everything's speeding up. This region of your brain is firing. Perceived or not perceived threat brings us into a heightened awareness state. And I believe that the common denominator in there, if we want to talk about it from a multidimensional energetic being standpoint, is that what's happening is we are ultra present. Ultra present. All of our circuits of energy. Now, I'm going to give you the super fast visual on this. We, as multidimensional energy beings, have these lines of light, if you could see it with your eyes, these lines of light that make up our greater energetic body.
Okay.
Right? An aura is a way in which we can talk about it, but it's even more complex than how we might just conjure up like, oh, my aura, right? And it's got all these moving parts in it. And any given moment, part of these lines of light that make up our greater energetic body are connected to other people, times, events, spaces, places. It's part of how we connect to those things. And that can be for better or for worse. And that's not what today's podcast is about, right? But, okay, so for better or for worse. So we've got these lines of light that go out and they're connected to things. And we're thinking about what we're doing next week when we're going on vacation with our family. And we're thinking about last week when we wish we would have wrote that email in a different way and it produced a fallout. And we're thinking about our kids and how we have to meet with the counselor at 2:30 today. And we're thinking about da-da-da-da-da.
Our 12-year-old boyfriend.
Yes.
And, I mean, like literally forever of our lives.
Yes.
Like everything that has happened. Okay.
And so as all of those things are taking up our life force energy, because that's what that is. Our life force is moving to that thing, event, time, place, whatever. And, it's circuits of energy. Think about, if you want to think about it in terms of like a bank account, you're depositing dollars over there.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden what happens in these moments that we're talking about is you pull your circuits of energy out of every single one of those things and you bring everything home. And all of a sudden, in that moment, you're so ultra present that everything does slow down. Now, when it's a crisis, an emergency, a threatening situation, you've got this massive speed up that's going
in your
physical biological physical body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably with enormous amounts of adrenaline and cortisol
right.
to boot, right? And so like we got this whole perfect storm of like, wow, ramping everything up. You know, it's that whole thing of like the incredible strength comes in those moments, people lifting cars,
right?
People and all that stuff, right? Well, think all of a sudden, I mean, that is the thing that is crazy, Kirsten, is this is our everyday capability if we didn't send our circuits of energy out into all the 500 other things we're sending our energy out into. That's what I'm tripping on right here in this moment. That this is our capability. To be in that kind of presence where everything actually expands and is just that moment. But that's not how we operate, right?
It's not, but we can get ourselves through through active meditation and through mindfulness and all this, which we're all starting to be aware of, even me, my type of person, you know. We're starting to be able to think about ways to use that, and wow, what an amazing thought that this is always accessible to us, but we're only using it at those emergency moments.
Right. Which now I'm going to bring in my good story, okay?
Okay. Oh, please.
It's a great lead-in. Okay. So I was in Germany several years ago at a class, and it was the culmination of a year-long training, and so it was like graduation night, if you will.
Okay.
And it was the end. I was so loving being in Germany. I was meeting all these people who I had been working with virtually for a year. And virtually, we didn't Zoom back in 2010 or whatever year this was. Like, virtual meant we were emailing and talking on the telephone. Okay. So all these people who I've had this long-standing relationship with via email and telephone calls, and here I was in person, we were meeting, it was wonderful. It was like, oh my goodness, you, me, I'm me, you're you. and it was graduation, and so we were having a party that night, a dance party. And we were all out there and dancing, and the energy is high like it is in events like that. And I remember dancing, and I remember having the most euphoric feeling where it feels like everything stopped. Time expanded, everything stopped. And I remember I was being spun around the dance floor, and I looked up, and I can still see it. I can see the lights in the rafters, and I could see in my periphery other people spinning, and the music that was playing, and it was like when you're watching a movie and they slow it down for you, right? You're watching the movie and they really want to highlight this is a really profound moment, so they slow everything down. Yes. And I was having that experience in this euphoric moment. And based on what we just said, I think it was a moment where nothing else existed in my life. All my circuits of energy that go out to wherever they all go out typically were all pulled into that present moment, and I was nowhere else but there. That was the only thing that was happening, and everything was this slow motion as I was being twirled around the dance floor. And it was a euphoric feeling. It wasn't like a, oh my God, I'm falling off a cliff feeling.
So isn't that interesting? Because, I think most people in the world don't have the opportunity to get into a world like you were in Germany, where you were, number one, you had the training to be there. You were with other people who were there that were it was the energy was so right. And it makes me think of an athlete in flow,
Right.
you know, and that kind of situation where someone has trained so much that they can leave everything else. And most of us, I think, the only time we feel that is when we're in an emergency situation, because that's the only time that we're really placed in that all hands on deck,
Right.
bring it all in right now.
Right.
You've got to survive.
Yeah.
And so truly, by studying that crisis mode, I would say most of us, if we've had that experience, I would think that almost anybody by age of 20 has had something like that. By way of knowing what that felt like, it can bring you into the vision of what being wholly present in a moment could do for you.
Yeah.
In a good way too.
Yeah.
So it's a glimpse
Yeah.
into that ability that we have. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
I know, right? Doesn't it make you want to practice pulling your circuits of energy
Yes,
home?
it sure does. If I could do that, you know, in just a normal day.
Right.
Wow. Well, thank you. That was very amazing sharing. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, stay tuned. We're going to be back in just a second with a wine to pair with the stopping of an emergency. Let's put it this way: an emergency. So we're going to be right back with and we'll wrap it up with the wine.
Next up, Kirsten's choice for a wine to open after the show.
If you have a friend who calls you and is crying and who needs some support from long distance, consider sending a gift from Uplift Gift. These are curated, beautiful packages of comforting items that will take care of your friend if you can't be there in person. Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough.
Now, what wine will Kirsten choose for your table tonight? Here she is.
All right, guys, welcome back. Now there's a place I can talk about that I know things about. I'm just not reading research going, oh my gosh, I'm not worthy. But it's so amazing to talk to you, Danielle. Thank you so much. This is, man, it puts a whole new spin on a world that I've lived in for so long that had none of this. And it's like learning a whole new language. And it's just really and then you hear the new language and you can appreciate what people are saying that you didn't know. It was all just this complete gobbledygook before you learn. It's just beautiful. So thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk today about probably the most famous stuck fermentation of wine ever.
Stuck fermentation.
Yes.
Wow. All right.
Make a transition there.
I can't. Tell me more.
All right. When you have a vat of grape juice that has been squeezed out of the grapes and they're sitting there in the skins and the juice, and it's all just sitting together, okay? It's called maceration as they sit there together. And white wines, they do not macerate for any period of time at all. They basically take the juice right away from the skins and the seeds, and then they either use natural yeast that are in the juice to let the yeast start eating the sugar, or they introduce yeast into the vat to eat the sugar that's in there, okay? That's called fermentation.
Right.
Okay, so when you're making a red wine, you can, at the maceration level, when the juice is sitting there with the skins and the seeds, you can pull off a little of just the juice, and you condense the existing juice and skins and all that, right? So you make it a more complex or dense red wine, right? And then
like a reduction?
Yes, like a reduction. Yeah,
Kind of.
Instead of boiling it off,
Right.
you're just pulling the liquid out.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Now, okay, so that's what fermentation is. That's what you do sometimes is you pull off some of this juice if you want to condense the existing juice, and such. So, and you need yeast to eat the sugar in either one of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeast to eat the sugar. And by the way, as yeast eat sugar, they produce alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
right? And carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
So alcohols, and guess what? The alcohol eventually gets to a high enough level to kill them. So they basically are committing suicide, but they're happy because they're in this vat of wine, right? But they'll eventually die from the lack of the high level of alcohol
Mm-hmm.
in the juice. All right, so back in 1972, Bob Trincaro. Now, there's Trincaro Family Estates is a very, very large company now, but back then they were just family-owned. Trincaro, it's still family-owned, but Trincaro Family Estates. And he was making a red wine called Zinfandel and it's from the Zinfandel grape. And this is 1972. They're in Napa Valley, California. And he decides to take off some of that juice so that he can densify and condense that existing juice of the Zinfandel. And he pulls off this, what is pink juice at this point, because it sat on the skins a little bit of time. So it's got a little bit of that dye from the outside of the red juice, red grapes. And he pulls it off and he just leaves it over in the corner of the winery and literally forgets about it. Literally forgets about this juice. Makes his Zinfandel and that's great. He loved it. Then within a couple weeks, he notices this vat and he realizes, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that juice over there. So he goes over to the vat and tastes it. Now, what has happened is it was a stuck fermentation. So what happened was the yeast that were existing in that vat already ate the sugar in the juice, and they didn't run out of sugar. They died. They increased the alcohol to a point where they were like, okay, we're dead now. And so the fermentation stopped. Okay? But there was still sugar left in this vat of pink juice. So he's like, well, it's kind of wine. It's wine.
Like a wine cooler.
It's like a wine cooler, exactly. And so he's like, well, I'm going to bottle this up and see what happens in our tasting room. Okay, people go freaking crazy about this what he was calling at the time. And they own, by the way, Trincaro Family Estates owns Sutter Home. Okay, right? So this is the tasting room at Sutter Home. And they initially called it the Œil de Perdrix. Yes, that's my awful French. Eye of the partridge, because eyes of the partridge are pink. Pink partridges have pink eyes. And people started going so crazy in the tasting room for this stuff that he's like, well, my gosh, I guess I better make this. And so he takes it into the government to get it all, licensed and everything. He's calling it Œil de Perdrix. And they're like, sorry, it has to be like English. So he, instead of calling it Eye of the Partridge, which we probably all would have not bought, he coined it White Zinfandel because it was a whiter version of Zinfandel.
Right, because it came out of the Zinfandel.
Out of the Zinfandel grape, right?
Right.
And he also used, in terms of his marketing, he called it a blush wine. He did not call it a rosé, which has connotations to dry wines out of Europe. He called it a blush wine, and that was his word, and that stuck. And so that is the most famous of all stuck fermentation. I will surprise you, I bet to know, it will surprise you to know that over 75% of all the Zinfandel grapes in the world are used to produce white Zinfandel. It is one of the most popular wines in all of the world. This lightly sweet, usually lower alcohol, not lightly sweet, relatively sweet, lower alcohol pink wine that we all have seen in college dorm rooms and grandma's house And sometimes it's a great wine. And they're actually now wineries doing very, very nice versions of white Zinfandel, when it kind of went from big boxes of wine to now being something that people are enjoying for those reasons. It's lightly sweet. It's got lower alcohol, and it's refreshing. It's cooled.
Yeah.
So I'm pairing today's talk about our slowing of time and that with the Sutter Home Reserve White Zinfandel. It goes for about $18 nationally a bottle. And by that price point, you know this is not just some rot gut stuff. I mean, someone is caring about how they're doing this. You get the sweetness out of it, but you also get a lot of strawberry and melon flavors. I have not had this wine. I will have this wine soon, because it would go so well with spicy foods, also sweet and sour foods that are hard to pair other wines with. Sweet and sour. I will tell you, I just love this. You know, you see the ratings and they'll say like 97 points, wine enthusiast or whatever. Here are their accolades for this. I'll end with the most funny one. So in 2019, they got the Ultimate Wine in the Ultimate Wine competition. They got 90 points. 2018, San Diego International Wine Competition, they got 90 points and a gold medal. Toast of the Coast in California, they got a gold medal. And then back in 2017, the Houston Livestock and Rodeo
Nice.
gave them the class champion double gold. And I have never seen the Houston Livestock and Rodeo mentioned as a source of a review, but that
I didn't even know they drank wine.
This is the right kind of wine at a Houston Rodeo. It's cool. It's sweet. It's like sweet. It's like a version of sweet tea. Right. It's just got alcohol in it. Hello, better than adding vodka out of your purse, right? Which I used to do. Well, thank you. Anything else you'd want to add at all today?
Nope. Okay. I don't think so.
Okay, well, we went way deeper and way further than I expected with this. So.
Right, but that's how it goes.
It's so fun.
We just launch
it's like, woo.
And then
where do we
time stops.
Yes.
And hopefully reproduce something that has quality.
We hope, at least at one point during your show.
At least there's one sentence that people can grab and go, wow, that is a game changer.
Thanks, Danielle. I'll see you next time we record. And thanks, you guys, for joining us. Yes. We love having you here. Talk to you guys soon.
We look forward to sharing a new story and wine with you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Wines and Wonders.